Nand Tandon, to give you a brief bio about him, Nand Tandon pursued graduate studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison after obtaining a master's degree from Delhi School of Economics in India. In 1968, Nand was invited to join the Dominion Bureau of Statistics, now Statistics Canada, by the chief statistician and an eminent Canadian social scientist, Dr. Sylvia Ostry. He worked as a senior researcher and project manager in various federal government departments, including Statistics Canada, Employment and Immigration, and Human Resources Development Canada. An active blogger on the internet, Nand has discussed immigrant issues and challenges. He's an active member of several Indo-Canadian organizations. I welcome Mr. Nand Tandon. Thank you.
I invite our distinguished panel, Kushal Mehra and Gyaandeo Maharajh to join us. So I did what all of us do in such circumstances, go to Wikipedia. And this is what I learned. Relativism is a family of philosophical views which deny claims to objectivity within a particular domain and assert that valuations in that domain are relative to the perspective of an observer or the context in which they are assessed. I think in simple words it means that, for example, if I am a Hindu, I have my Hindu values and I should be judged by those. And if you are a Muslim, you should be judged by your Muslim Sharia and your Muslim values, and that's what you should be judged. That seems to be they are saying it in sort of in their own way. It turns out that there are many forms of relativism, philosophical, cultural, moral. To learn more, I look forward to our speakers, the two speakers here. And we have really distinguished speakers today. Kushal Mehra, on my right, is a well-known podcaster in India who gives his broadcast under Charvak Road Broadcasts. I hope he does not mind if I call him a metaphysicist in the J. Krishnamurti tradition. He is one of the few people who has done extensive study of Charvak and Charvakas. Last night, I glanced at some of Kushal's podcasts and found that they are much more than about Charvak. In fact, Kushal is a master of many domains: religion, politics, journalism, social trends, Bollywood, even Khalistanis in Canada. And he has a connection with us. He studied in Canada and his better half is a Canadian too. So, welcome, Kushal. Dr. Gyaandeo Maharajh is an academic, a professor at the University of Ottawa. If he can describe him, his Janma Bhumi is Trinidad, and his Karam Bhumi is right here, just across this canal there, Ottawa University. When I think of academics, I think of PhD, which as we know stands for Doctor of Philosophy. But we know that very few of them are either doctors or philosophers. However, Dr. Gyaandeo Maharajh is both a doctor and a philosopher. In fact, he's a surgeon. Dr. Maharajh was born in Trinidad to a Brahmin family. He decided to become a doctor to serve the poor people of Trinidad. But fate brought him to Canada and to our beautiful capital, where he practices as a pediatric surgeon. His patients, and I looked for Dr. Maharajh, his patients give him rave reviews, not only for his surgical skills, but also for his humanity, his kindness, and his bedside manners. And he has not forgotten his country of birth either. He goes to Trinidad twice a year and performs surgery on children, and that too free of cost. Today, we will hear his philosophical side, and I look forward to hearing him, Professor Maharaj. Kushal, can I ask you to please start your lecture? Thank you.
Namaste everyone. Thank you very much for the rave reviews. I did not expect that. But, so I'm going to set the premise as to, obviously today we're talking about why pluralism isn't relativism. It's good that relativism has been explained already, so I don't have to do that. But the classical problem that we face in today's modern world, if I was to use the word modern, is that people have confused multiple concepts. So we're here in Canada. Obviously Canada is famous for a very particular concept that was instituted even in Canadian politics officially, which is called multiculturalism. And I think it was in the early 70s, if I remember correctly, where multiculturalism...
In 1985 or 6, and the Multicultural Act was passed.
Yeah, the act was passed, but the work on it started in the early 70s, the discussion started in the early 70s, and then eventually the act was passed in the 80s, and Canadians pride themselves on being multicultural. And often these days, when you look at discussions around multiculturalism or pluralism, at least from where I come from, it almost seems to me as if that multiculturalism now has become an excuse for anything goes. If anything goes, then then anything goes to what extent is the question we need to ask ourselves. So when we say anything goes, we're making a value statement. We're making an objective value statement that there is no right or wrong. And that's where the problem starts. And for me, where I come from India, primarily, that's my Janmabhoomi, that's where I've been living most of my life, although I have lived in Canada, and I'll be coming more often now, but I still primarily come from a land. And in India, what we live by is not multiculturalism. India lives by the philosophy of pluralism. Now, even pluralism and multiculturalism are extremely different conceptually. But again, pluralism is also not relativism. Now, I often give this example of the Jaina philosophy from India, of Mahavira, in which there is this concept called Anekatvad, which is basically there are 7 ways of understanding the truth. So I'm not going to tell you all the 7 ways, but for example, it says maybe this, maybe not this, or maybe not this and that. For example, it just goes, it says Syadasti, Syadnasti, etc., etc. Now, even at the end of that 7-fold system, but the message Mahavir is trying to give over there is that, yes, the truth is complex, but there is one truth. You can attain that truth. So even the plural way, or the Buddhist way of Chatushkoti, which is Nagarjuna, the great Buddhist philosopher, came up with the Chatushkoti system, or whether in the Upanishads, in the Hindu philosophy, there is always pluralism, but each and every one of those philosophies end up by saying, but there is an objective standard. We can measure things. We may not have the answers for every question, but there are answers. And what I see nowadays, under the garb of what I call pluralism, because that's what it's been bandied about, is that anything goes. If you object to a certain facet, and it could be any culture, it could be my own culture, the answer comes that that's just our way, you don't get our way. So when pluralism becomes an escape route for anything goes, I think that's when societies fall down. That's when societies suffer. And for some odd reason, people don't like to talk about it. If you talk about it, depending on the context, and it also depends who can ask that question. Sometimes it depends on your race, sometimes it depends on your religious identity, sometimes it depends on your gender. I don't think so we should live in a world like that. I personally come again from a point of view where, to me, it doesn't matter what caste, creed, race, religion you belong to. To me, when I'm dealing with a person across the table, I'm dealing with an individual. I'm not dealing with a group member. And unfortunately, the global discourse, whether it's in India, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in the United States of America, or wherever you go, today the global discourse has changed, where the focus of attention has gone from the individual to the group. And when you shift the focus from the individual to the group is when the problems start. So I'll just lay that down as of now, and I'd like to hear Dr. Sadhna.
Thank you, Maharaj. Namaskar. I'm reminded of a childhood story that I grew up with, of a young boy who came home from school, and he was in tears because he had been disciplined by the teacher because he was unable to spell. And so when his father saw him crying, he asked him what had happened. So he told him, I was unable to spell a word in class and I got disciplined. So he asked him, well, what did you have to spell? He said, well, the teacher asked me to spell bus. So the father got very, very angry. He took the kid and went to school and told the teacher that this was very unreasonable. This child was this small. To ask him to spell something as big as a bus, he would have been better off to ask him something more commensurate with his size, like mosquito. Whenever I get asked to speak at one of these things, by Bala or anybody else in the community, I always hope that it's going to be something that I already know and it's simple, and then it ends up being something I have to go educate myself about and then talk about it. So, the idea of pluralism, I have a very different tack on this whole thing. And so the idea between pluralism, and I believe the topic that we had ascertained was pluralism is not relativism. And as Dhananji had told us, there are many different types of relativism. There's social relativism, there's philosophical relativism, there's religious relativism. And if you really wanted to have a discourse on the links and the differences between pluralism and relativism, a short course would probably need the better part of a half a month. So to have what do we have now? Hour and a half discussion or so on this it's hopefully just skimming the Malay off the top. Pluralism, and as far as I understand the concept of pluralism, and I will limit myself to religious pluralism. And so my understanding of religious pluralism, and again I only feel authorized to speak of religious pluralism in Hinduism. It's the concept of having multiple deities, multiple authorities, multiple beings of importance within the religion. And as any of us would immediately recognize from our various involvements with the vast philosophy known as Sanatana Dharma, the Hindu religion lends itself very easily to religious pluralism. The concept, and certainly as is often quoted from the Rig Veda, Ekam Sat Vipra Bahuda Vadanti. And as Mehraji mentioned, whatever the slant you take on it, there is always in the end one objective, one truth, one unifying concept. How we get there and how we understand it is very different. And so it is easily mixed and confused with the idea of relativism. there's a very popular metaphor used in Hinduism of the, and Nagaji mentioned the 7 types of truths. The 7 blind men and the elephant. And that's in a metaphorical capsule exactly what pluralism is about. Very briefly, and for those who may not be aware of it, the story of the metaphor of the 7 blind men and the elephant is these 7 men who were from birth blind, always wondered about what this great thing the elephant is, and they've heard so many times and so often about the thing the elephant, and they could never quite grasp it, until one day they had the good fortune to actually physically meet an elephant. And so like the blind would do, they went with their hands to explore the elephant and try and appreciate what this is. And so the one person who happened to grab the trunk said, "Oh my, this thing called an elephant is very much like a snake." And the other one who happened to grab the leg said, "No, it's very much like a tree trunk." The other one who grabbed the tail said, no, it's like a vine," and so on. The point being that they were all right, but nobody was completely right. And in a sense, they were all wrong. And so the idea of pluralism then, certainly within the Hindu philosophy, stems from the idea that we are trying to comprehend a infinite, abstract being, one supreme truth. And right there everything falls apart, because we ourselves are limited. We are finite beings. Even our greatest capacity that maybe we would like to think is infinite, which is our capacity for thought, is itself finite. I don't remember much from my math classes, but I do remember finite and infinite are not the same. And so if you try to comprehend something infinite, even if you were to do the logical thing and try and break it into smaller parts, we would have to accept that each of those parts are themselves infinite. And so we're faced with the same problem. There's no way a finite could ever comprehend an infinite. And so we grasp little parts of it here and there, like the blind man and the elephant. And so we all have this different concept of what this infinite being is. And I would be so rude as to suggest that this is not something that is in fact limited to Hinduism or any other polytheistic philosophy, but is in fact a universal practice. I had the good fortune of growing up in a very pluralistic society, and we were very close, and everybody celebrated everybody else's festivals, and I attended many Catholic schools. I've had communion twice, not by choice. And that religion itself, if you take the Judeo-Christian philosophies, they themselves talk about one supreme being. Catholicism becomes a little bit difficult because they do accept a Trinity, which then starts becoming pluralistic. But if we were to accept that there was one infinite being within that religion, and they were represented by, if you wanted to be Abrahamic, it's the one truth. If you wanted to be Catholic, it would be Jesus Christ. I would guarantee you that if you asked a Catholic in America to describe Jesus Christ, and you were to ask a Catholic in Pondicherry to describe Jesus Christ, it would not be the same Jesus Christ. We have a natural affiliation for pluralizing things. And whether that extends to social ideas, religious ideas, it stems from a particular psychological construct within ourselves. So I'll leave that there for a minute, and we'll talk a little bit about relativism. Relativism, at least a little bit of it that I understand, has to do very nicely, as Maharajh put it, anything goes. It's a little bit more sophisticated than that, in that the idea, at least the moralists, the ethicists and philosophers who try to expound on this will have us believe that it is an idea of philosophy, morals and ethics that is not uniform. It is different for different peoples, for different cultures, for different geographies, within our own history. In the practice of Hinduism, there are older methods of worship that would practice animal worship. In fact, the result of that animal sacrifice would then be, for want of a better word, prepared in a very religious fashion on the oven, and that product, in fact, would be what the prasad would be. That seems very abhorrent to most of us sitting here today who would practice Hinduism, because that almost is the antithesis of what we believe and practice in the current era. But at one time, that was in fact the practice. As a religion, as a philosophy, we've largely become a vegetarian philosophy and religion, and the sacrifice of animals and belief in the sanctity of life has now become primary within the philosophy, within the religion. But at least in time, that concept of what was right has changed. If you go to different cultures around the world, and many cultures in the South Asian, African subcontinent, where they were very specially, if you go there as a special guest, they will prepare a very special dish of roasted insects for you. Most of us would not be very pleased with that. But if you were to refuse it, that would not go over well with your host. And so what the idea of good or bad for one group, one people, changes depending on a lot of different circumstances. Most of us accept this on a social and a cultural level, but we have trouble with this when we talk about religious and philosophical morals. If you look at things from a Hindu philosophical point of view, Sanatana Dharma, where we believe very much in this idea of dharma, which is roughly translated into the concept of duty, then we also have within the philosophy the idea of swadharma, your own obligations and duties. We accept that all these animals, char, achar, all the moving things that are created are the creation of that one supreme being. And so when he created the carnivore, when he created the tiger, they created a being whose dharma was to go around killing animals and subsisting on them. And so, if we took the tiger, for instance, they would not be following their dharma, they would not be fulfilling their moral and creative obligation if they were to decide they weren't going to kill anyone. Most of us accept that that would be wrong for you and I. So then we believe that there must be a set of moral and philosophical constructs that we can all agree upon and abide by. And this works out well for society, it works out well for the municipal governments and the provincial and federal governments, because it helps organize and maintain some idea of law and order. But you and I know very well that we don't actually subsist to these things. We don't accept all of them. There's two beings that exist in your head. There's the one that you display for the world, and then there's the actual being, the actual person. And so if you want to know the difference between those two things, then think of the conversation you would have if somebody were to ask you, what do you believe in? Then you would bring out what I call the display model. You would tell them about all the things that you think would make you a good person. Somebody who would be forthright and righteous and forthcoming and all these other things. But if you really want to know who you are, you need to look at what you do. Because that is driven by what you actually believe. Quick example. Do you believe it's wrong to lie? I believe most of us would answer yes to that question. Do you lie? Again, most of us would answer yes to that question. So the actual truth is, we don't actually believe it's wrong to lie. We think it's okay to lie, but in certain circumstances. But no, there must be some absolute truth. There must be some absolute good and bad. Okay. I learned this from my Bhabi about 10 years ago. She called me one day to say that she was in a very good mood because she had done something very good. What had you done? She was having a rough time. She had been in an accident and going through a lot of rehab and all these things, so was very down most of the time. Well, she had gone down to her physio appointment, and while she was there, she met this beggar on the street, and they went to, he wanted money. She took him inside a Subway, bought a big sandwich for him, gave him a nice full meal, bought him something to drink, and then she left feeling very good about herself because she had done something very good. And we both agreed that yes, she had done something very good. And then after that, I started thinking about it. I'm like, well, how do you know you did something good? Well, everybody else would say you did something good. Well, yes, but what's the actuality about that occurrence? So let's change some of the circumstances a little bit. Here's this gentleman who had been starving for 3 weeks. He can live about 21 days without eating anything. It was day 20. And hadn't he been fed, he would have passed away in the next 24 hours. Well, then it makes it even better thing she did. Was it really though? Because if she fed him that meal, she wasn't going to go down and look for him the next day. What she did was prevented him from dying the next day. He would now live for another 10, 12, 14 days before he passed away. And what she actually did was increase and prolong his suffering. Now is it a good thing that she did? Most of us would have to say that. Take the other side of that story, or the other side of a similar story. You're running late for an appointment, you're going to get the dream job of your life, you come downstairs, you're about to jump in your car and go, and you have 2 flat tires. Not 1, 2, because you probably deal with one quickly. Now there's no way you can use your car. Long story short, by the time it takes you to get all these things organized, you've missed your appointment. You've missed the interview. You've lost the job. You have to carry on with your regular mundane job, wondering about what could have been. And so for the rest of your life, this occurrence on that morning would be a terrible thing that happened. You'd probably stand there watching the 2 flat tires, cursing your fate. We'll change the circumstances a little bit again. If you didn't have those flat tires, you jumped in your car, you went outside, and in the first intersection, you got run over by a bus and got killed. If you and I knew that part of the story, then you would give thanks for the fact that you had 2 flat tires that morning. So the problem is not that figuring out what is good or bad or right and wrong, it's figuring out the pre and post story, because that's really what this makes us determine whether something was good or not. And I would back up even one step further from that. What we're really talking about is what's good and bad for us. What we consider good, what we consider bad, what we consider right, what we consider wrong. And that runs the whole gamut of where we stand in those things as a society, as a group, as a family, as an individual. So there's no end of opportunities to confuse these things. What connects the two things, I believe, is the idea of aham, ego. Because we are most interested in what and how things work for us. This is the philosophical slant on the pluralistic idea of a polytheistic philosophy and religion. That if you have the 35 crore devatas, if you have these 3.3 million gods and goddesses, there has to be one of them in there that will naturally attract your attention and gives you that sense of connection. It is what we do normally anyway. Prayer and pujan, and when we talk to God, it's that thing that exists here, somewhere between here and here. Yes, and I realize this is not what we normally think it is. So somewhere between here and here, when in our difficulties or when we feel particularly inspired by something and we naturally call out to some greater being, that is what I believe is actual prayer. And that being that we talk to in that moment is actually your concept of God or goddess or whoever it is you see them as. And so it becomes very individual. And even if you had a group of people sitting there who said they were all round huts, their rounds would not be the same. What makes it different is what made me decide to put on, I don't even know what this color is, but I put it on. And what made Maharaji put on that suit. It is what we thought was good. And it applies to both the concepts of pluralism, because we're looking to find the things that are advantageous to us and trying to avoid the things that are disadvantageous to us. And so it then also informs our idea of relativism and what our particular moral slants are on what we see as right and wrong, as good and bad. I know that's not quite the worldly view you have of it, Maharaji, but these are my simple thoughts.
All right, so I guess I have a few questions then. People often confuse, pardon me, my background is philosophy, that's all I know. So if you're playing thought experiments over here, because these are thought experiments. So modern science, as we know with the current evidence, Homo sapiens, that is, I mean, I'm assuming we're all Homo sapiens here. The underlying assumption over here, we're all Homo sapiens, as we know, is the latest evidence currently as of now is 300,000 years, right? The current species, I mean, as far as we are concerned. Now, is there any moral claim that I can make would be objectively bad for a Homo sapien 300,000 years ago? And is there any moral claim that I can make for Homo sapiens, assuming we're going to be one with the artificial intelligence, but still the Homo sapien is going to be there. The chip is going to be planted in your brain. Now, eventually, if we're going to get into what is consciousness, now we don't know that. So I'm making the assumption that nobody knows what consciousness is, whether there is a materialist like me that comes from the Charvak school, or where there is an astic like you that comes from, I don't know what your darshan is. My darshan is Charvak, so I'm just putting it out on the table. So, can we not find one moral value in the entire gamut of the last 300,000 years that we cannot give a definitive answer for? I think we can. And this is where people often confuse flexibility with having no answer. All your examples, I agree, do have complicated answers. Because if we change the variables, right, if we put X instead of Y, just like the famous butterfly effect is there, if the flapping of the wings of a butterfly leads to something catastrophic like a tornado, right, because one variable changed. But that does not mean it did not happen. The 7 blind men touched something and found something, but they all touched the elephant. They did not touch anything else. The elephant was there. That doesn't change. So the problem, now in religion, pluralism is a great thing, because if you don't have a pluralistic idea of religion, you have wars. And boy, have we seen religious wars as a species? I mean, we can't deny the truth. In fact, one of the biggest reasons I still identify as a Hindu is because my faith was not at war with people like me, who clearly did not believe in any divine claims. You know, we were given in the Sarva Darshan Sangraha by Madhava Vidyaranya, the first chapter. It starts with Charvak. Of the 9 schools in ancient India, number 1, it was given to the Charvakas. So they clearly did not have a problem with materialists. So pluralism is good, and I'm with you on that. But I still ask that question, that what if 300,000 years ago, and I, please forgive me for the example I'm going to give. There was a man, because we're doing stories. He just liked beating 2-year-olds up. He just beat them for no reason. Was that man okay? 300,000 years in the future, there is a man again. Women don't do that. So, there is this man again. He beats 2-year-olds. Is that man good? Is there any perspective we can spin it around and say, no, but his circumstances, maybe, his frontal lobe was pushed against something, he had a tumor in his frontal lobe, it was his tumor that made him do that. Okay? But he still did that. What if he did not have a tumor? Maybe he did not. Do we know any such occasion in history that we know such human beings? We do. Are they good? Or are they bad? Or is the answer, I don't know? We do know the answer. You can cut across cultures. You can look at anthropological data. You can go to any culture. Now you'll tell me, I found that culture where they do that to children. Yeah, we can actually find cultures in remote areas in the world where they do this. But my question again remains, does that make it okay? It's a very simple question that we need to ask ourselves, and what has happened is that we often confuse objectivity, and sometimes because of multiple variables, we think there is no objectivity. There is objectivity. We don't have the variables at play, and that's where pluralism is a beautiful concept, because pluralism gives us that flexibility to accept people. Like the great Australian philosopher Peter Singer, he has written beautiful essays on this. He likes to call it the expanding circle, or in America, a great thinker called Michael Shermer. Michael Shermer calls it the expanding moral arc. Now, we as a species started with, let's say, pre-agricultural human beings a few thousand years ago, 14,000 as per current evidence. Obviously, the evidence might change if we find new evidence, but as of now, the oldest evidence of agriculture is 14,000 years. Before that, we were basically hunter-gatherers living in bands of 250 to 500. That was the number we used to live in. Those people also had a moral framework. And as agriculture was basically invented, and that led to a sedentary life. Our species did not have to travel. Because, food was available, the supply chain was managed, we were just staying in one area, and that led to us having more numbers. And as the numbers increased, the complexity increases. And the complexity increases, the moral arc changes. Now, what Singer says is that the moral arc is expanding all the time. So, now, the interesting bit is, now we come from, the Hindu philosophy, we've always had this thing about not harming animals. So our moral arc, in that sense, as Hindus, was always expanded in that sense. Yes, now somebody might come from a Shakta tradition or some Tantra traditions and would have a different answer. But they too have certain caveats on consumption of animals. It's not an absolute answer there. They have certain caveats on consumption. So the point is that the moral arc is expanding. Now, if you look at, in fact, pre-agricultural cultures, they were very much in sync with the environment. They would care more for the environment, I think, than we do. They care a lot more. Now, I had this beautiful opportunity of speaking to a member of the Mohawk community from the First Nations in Canada, and when the gentleman was explaining their philosophy to me, it took me to Hinduism. And I was like, here's a culture that is so far away from me. We have nothing in common. We are geographically so different. But again, I could see a universal trend where they were in sync with nature. So was that gentleman a consumer of meat? Yes. But what was the answer that he gave? We would only consume how much we need. It was forbidden to consume more than what you need. We would make sure that the overall number of animals in that area keep on increasing, not decreasing. So in a very unique sense, that moral art was expanding at that time too. We were extending it to different aspects of nature. So the moral art is going to go on expanding. Now in today's world we have veganism. What's happening in veganism is modern day humans are expanding the moral art. They're expanding a certain value which involves compassion, responsibility. But why are they doing that? Because you set an objective standard which makes us expand our compassion, is the word. It makes you expand your compassion to different facets of your life. But who came up with that answer? Again, it is an objective that we all try to. The question is very simple. If everybody started living in today's world in a very minimalist fashion, let's say. Now, I'm a materialist, but I'm a minimalist too. I don't, have fancy watches or anything of that sort. I'm a very simple guy by the point. Now, if everybody did that, would that not have a positive impact? If everybody did that. Now, I know the tragedy of the commons exists, and nor am I saying you should live like that. You can live the way you want to live. But the point is, there is a measurable, objective way that if everybody lived in way X, it would have a Y impact. So why can't we simply say that particular way of living is just better? It's better. Not harming people is better than harming people more often than not. For example, if we are in a room of 10 people and assuming all 10 are sane, they are balanced, and what are our probabilities of survival if we are all non-violent? The probabilities of survival, at the end of the day, human beings and the games we play, these are all about human flourishing, or as Aristotle used to call it, eudaimonia, or we had different words for it in Hinduism. But we all play these games because at the end of the day, we want human flourishing. We want our species to flourish, but some cultures in that sense were more reward. They not only wanted their own species to flourish, they wanted other species to flourish too. So I think I should be comfortable enough to say, as an objectivist, to say that that philosophy is better because that includes more people. That philosophy has more compassion, and I think what happens is relativism has become an excuse to not talk about problems. Because we say, how do I know their circumstances? What if I do know their circumstances? Then am I allowed to talk about it? Or am I never in a position to know anything about their circumstances? What if they're my next door neighbor? Well, I don't know what's happening inside their house. Yeah, I don't know, but what if their next door neighbor keeps getting children in the house and I hear screams? Am I not supposed to take a call on it? I know it's a very cringy example that I'm using, but I use this example on purpose, and every time I have this discussion on relativism, I am kind of forced to use this example to my own chagrin because I hate it myself, that there is objectivity. We refuse to acknowledge it because we are being forced to say in this world that no, it's their way, let it happen. No, we will not let it happen because there are some ways that are better than other ways, and when you do the better thing, you progress. We are living in a beautiful country. Let me tell you, I come from India. This country, in most aspects, is objectively better than India. And I say this with full responsibility as an Indian. I love India. I stay there by choice, not by compulsion. I stay in India by choice. Nobody is forcing me. But let me tell you, if I was to do a material analysis, and we are all material beings, we talk about spirituality, and nor do I want you to stop believing in any deity. Please don't confuse that. But the point is, 98% of our issues in life are material issues. We use the 2% to make an excuse for the 98%. We use the lack of answers in the spiritual realm to not discuss the answers in the material realm. I have never been bothered about the spiritual realm. You can believe in what you want to believe, as long as you don't harm me in the material realm. Because I don't know if I'll be born again, so I'm only concerned about when I'm alive. That's how I look at it.
Thank you, Kushal, and thank you, Gyaandeo ji. You'll agree with me that we are having a very stimulating talks here, a stimulating conversation. I think it's time now to move to question and answers. And before I open it up to the floor, I have a question for each of you. We have been talking so far in a very abstract way, and you coming from the Sankhya school. Charvak is part of the Sankhya school, I don't know. No.
Sankhya is Astic, Charvak is Gnostic.
Oh, okay. I thought, okay. So, you're coming to Charvak school, and you are coming from Sanatan school, and we have seen... So, we have covered it's a living proof of the pluralism of the Hindu faith, Hindu religion. So, I have a question for you, Kushal. Do you think that Hindus are moving about from pluralism, not as a religion, but as a people? Are they becoming less? Can we still claim India to be a plural society, especially when a large section of the society is inclined to trying to the othering of a very large segment of the society. If you know what I mean.
Yeah, I get it.
Okay. So, can it still be a pluralist society? And are certain segments of Hindu society trying to convert it to some kind of an Abrahamic faith? That's the question for you, Kushal. And for you, the question you talk about dharma, as you know, in the Hindu dharma, they talk about the dharma of the Brahmin, the dharma of the Kshatriya, the dharma of the Vaishya, the dharma of the Shudra. Are we all sort of now converting into a Vaishya dharma? All sort of becoming, for example, your own profession of doctor. Now, in the Western world, the ethics of a doctor are governed by the Hippocratic Oath. Now, do you think Hippocratic Oath is still valid, or is it still the governing the dharma of the physician? Are the physician now still sort of more into a commercial mode? That's the question for you.
MOSQUITO, mosquito. So, yes, as a group, as a body, we are governed by a universal philosophy, the Hippocratic Oath, to serve your fellow man, to try is, in the Latin, it's two closely related concepts, primum non nocere. So at first, do no harm, and noli non nocere, above all, do no harm. There are many different takes on that, and many very prominent physicians have interpreted that variably. In the end, I think it comes down to, as a physician, of any persuasion, whether you're a medical physician, a surgeon, psychiatrist, whatever it is, you bring you to that equation. And whatever your system of beliefs, whatever your particular slant, and however you understand the world, that is very much embedded in how you practice your profession. Within the confines of what legally you're obliged to do, and of course then who you become as a physician, then is some marriage of these two broad concepts that run parallel. Commercialism, definitely there's a huge part of the practice of medicine, both on a global scale and national scale. In fact, this morning I was listening to a very lively debate on, again, the idea of introducing privatization to the Canadian healthcare system. There's always this idea that, you know, and it's not something that's just limited to medicine. Kushalji brought up the example earlier of when we went from hunter-gatherers to farmers, and somewhere we decided we saw an opportunity to increase our needs way beyond what we needed. And so we went from hunter-gatherers to farmers to commercial farmers. And it's easy to think that, you know, as we have heard in the last few days, you know, we have to, it doesn't matter that you're blowing each other up, but we have to let all these boats of grain out of the port, because this is how we feed the world. This has to supersede everything else that's going on. So that whenever there's, you know, and history is replete with examples of people who started off things with very good intention. You know, Archimedes primarily, Archimedes as well, but Einstein primarily amongst them, where, you know, the whole idea of splitting the atom is supposed to catapult man by so many decades into this non-dependency on fossil fuels and all these things. And the only thing we succeed, well, not the only thing, but one of the earliest things we succeeded in doing was finding out how to turn it into a bigger gun. So that whenever there's these ideas, that there's always a group of people who find ways to monetize it, to commercialize it, to, you know, make it beneficial, largely for a small subset of society. You know, I'm very impressed and now the world's becoming such a global field that it's hard to have things just happen in isolation. As part of what I do in Trinidad, I'm part of a board that has been struck by the government for, it's called the Children's Life Fund Authority. So that what we do is for children who need healthcare that is beyond the capacity of the country, there's now a fund that pays for them to go other places to have healthcare. And so two of the more common places that they're sent to, and part of the group that recommend where they should be sent for cardiac surgery in particular, one is to a place in the Cayman Islands called Health City Cayman Islands, which is a venture run by the Narayan Health Group out of India. And they've made a huge medical industrial complex. They have from primary care physicians all the way up to super specialists, all the facilities you need. It's in the Cayman Islands. You pay one price, you go and you get everything done, totally better everything. And then the other place that we're now sending people are to New Delhi at Indraprasth Medical Health Center, which is part of the Apollo Group of medical centers. So these people, and there's many other examples, there's Cleveland Clinic and Mayo Clinic and so on in the US. People have done a really good job of commercializing a particular standard of healthcare and now selling this as a franchise. It really depends on what you want to get out of it and what you think you should want to get out of it. I'm chastised not uncommonly by my colleagues who say, well, you know, you go down, and you mentioned at the beginning, I go down to Trinidad a couple times a year to provide free cardiac surgery to the children there. And I remain to this day unclear whether I'm doing that for their benefit or for my benefit. Makes me feel very good. I feel somehow my decision for my initial impetus for becoming a cardiac surgeon and physician was so I could come back to that country and provide that service. Conveniently, we'll call it fate. Sent me elsewhere, and then I'm providing that service here, but I go a couple times a year there and I feel less slimy about myself. But it doesn't, I like to think it doesn't materially change the benefit that the children who I interact with get out of it. And especially as you pointed out, I'm big on stories, that's how I see the world. There's another great story about the high tide and the starfish. Big high tide washes up hundreds of thousands of starfish onto the shore. They get stranded there. Starfish are these marine animals which, if they can't survive out of the water for more than a few hours. So clearly by the time the next tide came around, 10, 12 hours later, they were all died. And so this one gentleman was walking along lamenting the fact that these hundreds of thousands of lives were being lost. And coming the other way now was another gentleman who was there coming up, and he was picking up starfish and throwing them back into the ocean. So the first gentleman asked me what he was doing, and he says, well, I'm saving the starfish. He says, but the hundreds of thousands of them, it's not going to make any difference. And so he looks at him very pointedly, bends down, picks one up, throws it in the ocean, and says, he made a difference to that one. And so all I can say, short to answer the question, is I do my best to try and make the difference that I can in my way to the people that I get to interact with. And very much in synchronicity, I think, with your way of looking at things. I don't have any control over what I get to interact with. I've come to the point where I believe that I don't have to wonder about what it is I have to do next. It gets put in front of me. And that's called many names. It's circumstance, it's fate, it's God, it's whatever you want to say. But all I know is that if something comes in front of me, I believe that that's meant for me to look at and somehow interact with.
Thank you.
So I have to say, because he was being too nice. So first of all, there are two ways of feeling good about yourself. He's doing the hard one. You could just have a big juicy burger and feel good about yourself too all the time, but that's the easy way out. He's doing the hardest thing. He's actually traveling somewhere. So at the end of the day, again, it comes on human flourishing. So even if it at the end, and I know what you're trying to say, that you don't know whether it's you who's feeling good or the other person. You definitely are. You're unsure about the other side, and I completely get that. Whenever I've worked in any social cause, I've always said that I just do it because I feel good. I have no delusions about doing any kind of social work because I want the other person. But I would still caveat it by saying this: when you do something good, try to make sure that it is better than the big juicy burger, because the big juicy burger only gives you unhealthy things in the end of the day. Having said that, to answer your question about what's happening in India, again, how do we answer it is there is only one way. If we were to do a qualitative and quantitative analysis of different matrices and indices that measure human flourishing indices. That's the only way. And I would not trust an index which gives Sri Lanka the happiness index that it does, and then you all know what's happening. So I will reject each and every indices that is, I've done deep dives into most of them. I'm a sucker for reading these kinds of things, so I end up reading most of them. But if I was to look at government data, and I'm not sticking to one political party, I'm talking about government data for the last 70 years in India. And if I was to measure poverty numbers, if I was to measure crime numbers, if I was to measure different statistics in India, year after year, irrespective of the government in power, India is becoming better. India is becoming better. So I'll give you an example. So in India, we tend to have these religious riots, right? One religious group fights with the other. First of all, even one life lost is bad. But let me tell you, I'm an 80s kid. I have been witness to a horrific riot in Mumbai in the 90s. I think it was 92, 93. Then came the Gujarat riots in 2002. Then came the Muzaffarnagar riots a few years ago. And I don't know how to say this, but what has happened over the years is the Indian state capacity is improving, again, irrespective of the government in power. So even the potency of the riot is reducing. So let's say in the old riots you would have X property damaged worth X million rupees and X lives lost. Now if you study the riots also now in India, the damage is less, the lives lost are less, the speed at which justice is delivered, it becomes better. For example, there was a time in India where women would not, anybody who's lived in India, you know women would not go to the cops. Anybody who's lived in India, you know that. I don't need to tell you that. You know if a woman was treated badly in India, they would not go to the cops. So if you look at the trend line, with the advent of modernity in India and women realizing their rights, so in the initial maybe 5-6 years you'll see a spike. Because naturally now women are feeling more and more confident, so they are going and complaining to the cops. So the baseline would spike for a while. But what you need to test, the test of a society is longitudinal data, right? Over a period of time, is that curve going on increasing, or is that curve going there and then flattening and starting to decrease? And I think if you judged India on all those parameters, outside of the screaming newsrooms, which I don't know what's with Indians, I don't know why they like to scream on news channels I don't know, I mean, I've seen the news channels over here. I was telling my wife, these people are so silent. I mean, we're just used to shouting on the screen. So my request to everyone would be, do not go by the shouting people on Indian television. That's not a measurement. That's not the right way to measure data or measure. That's like, I would look at Donald Trump's Twitter account and make judgments about the United States of America. I don't know how else to say. I mean, the President of America writes a tweet, although that was a funny one. When Greenland was being discussed to be bought, and then Trump put a photo of Trump Tower on Greenland, and he said, "Hey, we'll not do this with you." I mean, it was funny, but I mean, do I think America is chaotic then? It's not. Let's just face the facts. America is not chaotic. So, secondly, I think a lot of this image is created through social media. Now, social media is based and designed on hacking your negativity bias. Imagine this. You get up in the morning and you say, "What a nice day." How many people are going to watch this? You think you're going to watch it? Let's get real. Are you going to watch it? You're not going to watch it. What a nice day. Yeah, even I know it's a nice day. I'm in it. You're not going to watch it. But the complete opposite happens. You get up in the morning, you put your phone up. Unfortunately, in the bathroom, I don't know why people do it, even I do it. But we all do it. We put the phone up in the bathroom and you say, "Oh my God, the world is about to be finished." You're going to watch that. All of you are going to watch that. And then what happens is that skews your sense of reality. If the world is about to perish, your neighbor is about to tell you that. Or maybe 1 kilometer down the line, or maybe a square block, or maybe someplace. But you can drive through the city, nothing is happening. Everybody seems to be going about doing their work. And that's the same thing about community. Obviously, look, we cannot deny communal tensions in India. We partitioned on religious lines. I'm not going to lie about it. Pakistan was created. Everybody knows that. Are there communal problems in India? Yes. But are there racial problems in the West? Aren't there? There are, right? I don't think this society is going crazy. I certainly don't think so. But I definitely say, I like the West, but I have noticed this trend in the West. The West assumes its problems are global problems. And other people's problems are not even problems. That's a trend I see in Western discourse. And that I say as an Indian who has traveled extensively and who reads and who follows Western discourse, it's assumed, as if, I get up in the morning, I should have an opinion on Ukraine. Oh yeah, I have to go and work. Why are you asking me what is my opinion on Ukraine as if I know anything about Ukraine? Maybe I can't even point it out on the map. What are you going to do then? But then you have to. You have to do it. So I think the media does what it's supposed to do. And are there bad people in every society? Obviously there are bad people in every society, but I think India is a very robust society. We have many problems, and I'm never going to hide. I mean, anybody who watches my podcast would know I criticize many aspects of Indian society, and I don't cut corners. I go head on. And even my own community, which is the Hindu community, I don't spare them either. But the point is that I am an eternal optimist. Like, the best book I recommend everybody should read this book is a book by an American professor at Harvard called Steven Pinker. He has written this book called Enlightenment Now. What he does is he charts human progress, all of humanity, over a period of time, and he puts it in different indices. Poverty. Are we poor or are we richer? Let me tell you, let me break it to all of you. This is the best time to be alive. If you think otherwise, just ask yourselves, do you want to be born with those humans 200 years ago? No, most of you don't want that. We have this, I like to call it the golden age syndrome. We always imagine an imaginary past. Oh, everybody was holding hands and singing Kumaya and dancing all over the place. No, they were not. They were killing each other. We're far better than that. Because I'm a moral objectivist, I genuinely believe humans today are better than humans in the past. Because I can measure them on most parameters. Humans today respect women more. Do they or do they not? You can look at any culture. I don't care if you're black, white, brown, whatever. Humans today respect women better. The humans in the past did not. Yeah, somebody will come. But my text says that there is a textual reality and then there's the ground reality of how you treat women. Humans today are better in most parameters. They just don't like to accept that. And they try to be, again, I'm bringing it back because this discussion is on relativism. They try to wheel around everything. Oh no, the ancient times were better. Not one. If I was to put you in a time machine, not one would go back in the past. They will not. And the thing is, you go back in the past, you're not allowed to come back. You are not allowed to come back. You are staying with those people. First of all, they will not even speak your language. Their language will be something crazy. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Kushal. We could carry on this conversation some other time, but I think time to throw the floor open to people for questions. I just want to make an exception in my case. Yes, I would like to go back to the time of 4th century BC, at the time of Buddha, Charvak, Mahavira, Aristotle, and okay, but that's an exception.
I would like to go back there too.
Okay, now floor is open for question. If anybody has a question, please raise. You come to the floor here. Swati, is there a microphone? Yeah, here. So please raise your hand and ask your question to whoever you want to ask. Thank you.
Maybe we'll walk up to the second one, yeah?
My question is for Kushal. You said that there's a moral arc, right? So, and it's always expanding. So where do we stop that, or do we stop that at all, or just we use the Hood principle that you just said, so that we know that, okay, this is too much, or anything like that?
So the moral arc works in a very simple way, right? Mm-hmm. You follow, I think, if I remember correctly, it's called the harm principle. Mm-hmm. Right?
That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah, so the harm principle is very simple. If you live your life on the basis of the harm principle, I think most things will fall in place. Mm-hmm. That if you do not cause harm, mm-hmm. and if that's your intention, you don't want to cause harm. See, at the end of the day, every action that we take, every step that we take has consequences. Mm-hmm. Has consequences. Whether you look at it from a materialistic perspective, that is mine, mm-hmm. or whether you look at it from a believer's perspective, even in Hinduism, there are different kinds of karma, right? Prarabdha karma, different kinds of karma are there. So whatever karma you do in this life, they kind of have these consequences on the next life. But the point is, if you follow your life using the harm principle, I think you're pretty much good. And look, at the end of the day, look at how we have expanded as a species. We were just about our tribe. Then we made it about our state. Then we made it about our country. Then we made it about our species. Now we're talking about other species. Now we're including plants and the environment in it. So I think, and the next, believe me, when Elon ends up in Mars, we'll talk about the Brahman. We respond as our reality changes. So next up in the race will be Mars.
So there's no such thing as too much morality, I guess.
There's no limiting principle, right? If that's your question, right? You're talking about a limiting principle. Well, it depends. I mean, as of now, the limiting principle could be something that I can directly or indirectly, or at least I can postulate, theoretically. So those are my limiting principles. Now, today I cannot conceive of something, but tomorrow I may be suddenly, through the accident of nature, be in a position to conceive it. Like, we did not know the Higgs boson until we had the Large Hadron Collider, right? We had theoretically imagined that. And then we had the Large Hadron Collider, and then we actually found that out. But even, let's say you did not even have a theoretical understanding of the Higgs boson. Does that mean it did not exist? Or let's say we did not have a theoretical understanding of gravity. Gravity still existed, right? So you're always working within the realm of what you know or what we know as a species cumulatively. Because what I'm trying to look at is that not as my level, at a species level.
Okay, the reason why I asked that question is, I've been questioned a lot on me not eating beef, because I'm in a Western society. And I really don't have a good answer for that. And a lot of people often say that maybe it can, help with the nutritional needs of India, being a vast population. So do you think is there a need in that regard to sort of not eat it or eat it? Because there's obviously morality, and it says that you should not hurt other animals, right?
So are you saying people have asked you that you are a vegetarian? Why are you?
Yeah. And my question is often morality, because I'm fairly moral, but I see that to be a very weak argument.
I think it's a pretty good argument, and this is coming from
No. Like if we look at a country like India, we can actually help that, by butchering more and more meat, we can fulfill nutritional needs. So that's what the question has been asked. So in that sense, does it make any sense at all to be vegetarian?
I think vegetarianism is a very valid lifestyle as long as you supplement yourself.
No, I'm talking about people who are below poverty line.
Well, first of all, I want to clarify one more thing. India is not a majority vegetarian society. India is a majority non-vegetarian society. As per the last government data, 65% of Indians are meat eaters. And now I'm going to let you in another fact. The state that I and this gentleman ethnically belong to, Punjab. The impression is of, how Punjabis are non-vegetarian. One hand tandoori chicken and everybody dancing around. The third highest vegetarian state in India is Punjab. The third highest number of vegetarians percentage-wise in India are in Punjab. So as far as I'm concerned, look, if you have the resources, then you should be in a position to have a vegetarian lifestyle. But if somebody chooses, due to lack of resources, to have a non-vegetarian lifestyle, then as long as you don't give them enough options, like let's say mock meat or something of that sort, then I think you should not have a moral judgment on them, because in that position they'll die. I mean, and it's always have to be, you always go on the side of better nutrition, if I was there.
Okay, so sort of depends on
Can we have other questions, and maybe later on we can come back? Are there any other questions?
My name is Marsha. I'm from Guyana. This is my friend from Guadeloupe, so we're Caribbean. So my question is, so you mentioned, before the agricultural revolution, we were all hunter-gatherers, which means that we ate meat. How did the shift happen from, going from being hunter-gatherers to eating meat eaters, to India being primarily vegetarian? So, or a large percentage of people. So how did that happen? Does it have a religious basis? So I have a two-part question. How did it shift from we were all meat eaters when we were hunter-gatherers to the agricultural revolution to not eating meat because of respecting animal? Does it have a religious basis? Is it grounded in religion? And my second question is, what are the origins of the Hindu religion? When did it start, and what are its origins? Thank you.
Who wants to?
I think we're both going to answer that.
I'll answer your second question first. I don't know. And I mean that very seriously, in the sense that there's two parts to the philosophy and religion. As you probably know, it started, like most other cultures, as an oral tradition. And so it was, like we were talking about earlier, none of us wants to go back to an earlier time. Part of that is based on what our knowledge is of those times. And I firmly believe that our knowledge of those times are tremendously incomplete. We have very limited bits and pieces of information, and we are very good at filling in the gaps. And it's a very imagined timeline and story that's created. There's some parts that we have very hard evidence for, but there's lots of it that we've kind of filled in. There's a huge debate going on now as to how accurate these stories are because of who filled in the gaps. A lot of the philosophy and history and doctrine and everything else that came out of India, it wasn't brought out by Indians, it was brought out by colonialists, and there was a very different slant on everything. And now a lot of these things are being re-looked at and reinterpreted, and the stories being retold, right? There's lots of stories about what would happen if the conquered people told the history, not the people who conquered. So, trying to put all of this together, what the history and origins and development of Hinduism as a religion is not something that we know or can pinpoint with a great amount of detail. If you go into the scriptures, then you have to do so with a tremendous amount of belief and faith, and then you take what's given there on face value. That gives you a very different timeline, and as we learn more and more, those things are starting to become more synchronous. And that's as much as I can tell you about that part of it. The first part of it, as to when we made the shift, then again, it's hard to be sure about, and again, a lot of it is imagined. It would make some sort of intuitive sense that traveling around in a very nomadic lifestyle is not exactly the simplest of lives. It's not very easy, it's not very reliable, it's not very good for retirement planning and all these kinds of things that we think about today. And so there would have been some desire, along with some element of happenstance, where things like grain and the advent of flours, storable foods, right? This was one of the things that allowed the big shift, is that we were now able to have to cultivate food sources close by, and then we were able to store them at some period of time, so that we didn't have to running around literally eating on a day-by-day basis. And it gives you a great idea of how romanticized that whole idea has become, because now a lot of people want to have those diets. We talk about prehistoric and Paleolithic diets and all these things, but these were really good things. I don't think anybody back then would necessarily agree with you. And it was not done for the reasons we try to do it today. And so when that shift happened, again, is a very broad timeline. Why did it happen? And was it something that was a religious injuncture, as opposed to the other way around? And I think there's evidence for both. It is very tempting, ties in a little bit to your question about why as a Hindu everybody's good with eating everything else, but we can't eat beef. I think that was your question, right? Yeah, so nobody cares about the chicken, but don't touch the cow. But to use that as an example, I think you can make a very good anthropological, might be a very good PhD thesis, a very good anthropological argument about why it became, since as the cow, and there's I'm terrible with giving people credit for what they say, so I forget the name of the author, but they wrote a very good book called Guns, Germs and Steel.
Jared Diamond.
Jared Diamond, thank you. And they talk about the impetus for development and progress based on essentially what was a protein economy. And so I don't think it's a big leap of faith to see that there came a point in time within the Indian subcontinent where the cow became domesticated and flourished, that it became useful on a lot of different levels. As you know, there's a lot of use of products of the cow. So it's a prehistoric tractor. It's a source of protein without sacrificing the quote-unquote golden goose, right? So you can keep the cow and get the protein. It provides fuel. They die, you can use the skin for hope. So it's not a far reach, I think, to see how that it would become much more valuable to society to keep this animal alive rather than for the short-term gain of sacrificing it and getting the protein benefit out of it. One of the problems with older civilizations and religion and the interaction with those civilizations is that there was no other organization of society. It is all done through religion. So religion is not just about the part of your life that way helps you connect with God. It is also about your social conduct. It's about the political construction of society. It's about how you conduct warfare and interact with other groups and all these things. So everything came through religion. And again, it's not a far reach, at least in my mind, to see why it would become necessary to sanctify this animal, to protect it within that society. And so I believe it's very plausible that that's why the cow attained its special status that it did within the subcontinent. If you move just slightly east, in a very different climate, where cows can't survive very well because the climate doesn't allow them to get hand-foot and mouth disease and die by the thousands, the cow's not on the landscape at all. Very small pockets, it's not this wide-scale thing. And I'm talking about the Far East China. There, another animal flourished, the pig. Right? And there was other reasons why that became the main domesticated animal, not the cows. So, whether to answer your first question, there was a religious injunction that says the cow is in fact holy and does all these very, very important holy functions. Therefore, it is to be worshipped and sanctified and not to be touched and killed. Or it became a very useful instrument of society and so became necessary to be sanctified. I don't know that we have the answer to that question.
All right.
My small take.
So I'll answer question 1 first. So as far as the meat-eating patterns are concerned, we can actually trace it. Obviously, we go by some assumptions here, but I guess I'm going to say something that might be controversial to some people, but I'm going to say it anyways. I think vegetarianism as a mainstream Indian thing is primarily a Jain absorption into mainstream Indian life. I'm going to say this very openly. I don't know, many people may not agree with me. But if you ask me, you can clearly see traces of absolute non-violence. And when a Jaina philosophy talks about non-violence, it means not even in the brain. You can't even think of harming someone. That's the level that if you think of harming someone and you may not end up harming something, the term they use is jiva. Jiva. You're still not non-violent. You should stop thinking about it. It's absolute pacifism. So there's only one philosophy in India, in that sense, that's really, if I was to use the cliched line, a religion of peace, it's actually only Jainism. There's only one religion of real peace in that sense on planet Earth, that's Jainism, in that sense. All other religions have, qualified answers. Why did people become vegetarian is very simple. It was a viable option. the moment it becomes a viable option in an area in a post-agricultural society, people who have that consciousness in them, for whatever reasons, are going to go for that option because they can do it. Now, you cannot expect the Jarawa tribe in the Andaman and Nicobar Islands in India to live a Jain lifestyle. That would be insane. You can't expect them to do that. Their surrounding is not going to allow that, and their stage at the evolutionary timeline is not going to allow that. So you have to understand where I come from. I'm a materialist. I only look at things at the material level. I don't see spiritual. As far as when Hinduism comes, now that question is depending on you use the term Hinduism. If you was to ask someone to use Nassim Taleb's word, skin in the game, they don't use the word Hinduism. They say Sanatan Dharma. Now for them, Sanatan Dharma is eternal. But if you were, and even in, Dr. Saab is here, in university departments, they have not even decided what religion is at a definitional level. There is no clear-cut understanding on what religion is or what is the definition of religion in any philosophy department or any social science department across universities. I don't know why I ended up doing this painstaking exercise of looking at their definition of religion. I could not find one. But they all know what it loosely is. The classical Sorites paradox is that, it's a grain, it's a grain, it's a grain. We don't know when the grain becomes the heap until it actually becomes the heap. And then we say, now it's a heap. But if I was to ask you, when does the grain become the heap, you cannot answer it. So I think the definition of religion is something in that sense of the Sorites paradox. That we don't know when it becomes a religion, but we know it is a religion. It's like that. So in that sense, we can easily trace that to the Indus Valley civilization, and we can now it depends. Then the debate will happen, and if you are someone who believes in the Aryan migration theory, you would say religion came in India from outside. In that sense, Hinduism. If you are a critic of the Aryan migration theory, you would say India is a continuing civilization. So it depends on which side of the spectrum you are. But even if you assume the Aryan migration is real, I'm a skeptic. Full confession, I'm a skeptic. Even then, if you trace the Rig Veda, right, you can trace it to at least 4,000, 5,000 years. You could easily, even in academic departments. I mean, the most renowned institute in India that does the holistic study of Indian scriptures is the Bhandarkar Research Institute in Pune. It is the most prestigious institute. Even the Bhandarkar Research Institute now gives the date of the Rig Veda as 2500 BCE. Yeah, they do that. So that would be my answer.
Thank you. I'm sure there are a lot of questions people have in their mind. I have a few, but I think in the 21st century we are governed by the clock, and the clock tells me it's time to end this thing. I think you'll agree with me that we had a very stimulating and our expansion of knowledge. I have learned quite a bit in this last 90 minutes, and I wish there were a lot more people who could benefit from what our two distinguished speakers had to share with us. And once again, I would thank you all for coming here, and I thank Kushal, and I thank you, Dr. Maharaj, for your contribution. And so, Swati, back to you.
Thank you. That was a very, very interesting conversation. I just didn't realize the time go by. We really thank you, Dr. Gyaandeo Maharajh, Kushal Mehra, and thank you, Nandan, for moderating the session, and thank you everyone for being here, participating in this. It was quite an intense